Thank you all for joining us this evening. We are so excited to have you for the Sierra Sacramento Valley Medical Society's virtual town hall. My name is Lindsay Coate. I am the Director of Programs here at the Medical Society, and again, welcome. We're glad you are here. I just wanted to take a moment to remind you all about the Joy of Medicine program that we have available to all physicians within the Sacramento region. We have virtual resiliency consultations with licensed and vetted psychologists and life coaches. We have virtual peer groups available for you and many other resources on the website joyofmedicine.org. If you have not visited the website, I highly encourage you to do so. So before we get started this evening, I do want to do a little bit of housekeeping. I see that many of you have already found our Q&A chat function. So throughout the presentation, if you have a question for Dr. Chuck, please simply submit it in the chat function and I will read them off at the end of his presentation. Also, just a reminder, this is being recorded and we will post this at a later time on joyofmedicine.org. So I'd like to introduce you all to Dr. John Chuck. He is a man that needs no introduction, but I'm going to give him one anyway. So Dr. Chuck is a family physician and the regional chairperson of the Physician Health and Wellness Leaders Group for the Permanente Medical Group. And he also serves as the Chief of Health Promotion for Kaiser Permanente in the Roseville and Sacramento region. His areas of interest include work-life balance and resiliency training. And he is a graduate of UC Berkeley and the UCLA School of Medicine. And he did his family medicine residency right here locally at the UC Davis Medical Center. John is also the founder and CEO of Serotonin Surge Charities, which is a nonprofit organization that raises money for safety net clinics. And last but certainly not least, I am thrilled to work directly with John as he is the chair of our Joy of Medicine Advisory Committee. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to John Chuck. Thank you.
Well, Lindsay, thank you for that kind and generous introduction. I'm super happy to be here. I am very grateful to the Medical Society for sponsoring this presentation. I love Lindsay and Eileen Wetzel and Sam Mello did so much work behind the scenes to make this technology work. We actually rehearsed this, and so hopefully it's running well. I want to let you know that the Joy of Medicine program that this local medical society runs is, in my mind, the nation's best medical society sponsored physician health and wellness program. And how fortunate are we in this region that they laid the groundwork for resiliency and joint meaning work for us prior to the advent of COVID-19. So it would have been very difficult if this pandemic hit us and the Medical Society had not been preparing all of us in the region to be resilient and to be well in the face of challenges. So thank you very much. I'm a huge fan of the Medical Society. If you've ever considered joining a committee there or serving on the board, please do. They host very nice dinner meetings with delicious food. I never go away hungry. All right, so I am steering this ship apparently, and I am going to move on to my next slide. Okay, there we go. So I grew up in San Francisco, and there's a little town across the bay called Berkeley. And if you grow up in the Bay Area, you can buy dairy products from a company called Berkeley Farms. And for a long time, the advertising slogan for Berkeley Farms was "Farms in Berkeley." And it was just an interesting, fun question, because if you've ever lived in the Bay Area, you're thinking, are there farms in Berkeley? And the answer is that Berkeley Farms, this huge dairy company, actually did start in Berkeley and produced the product there for decades and decades. They've moved their headquarters to Hayward, but I bring this up, this farms in Berkeley question, because some people are asking, is it possible to have wellness during a pandemic? Like, isn't that just a time of darkness and despair? But the encouraging answer I have for you is you absolutely, positively can have joy and meaning and wellness during a pandemic. And we're going to talk today about how that could possibly be. You've heard the idiom or metaphor, the elephant in the room is this or that, right? And uh, once again, I grew up in San Francisco. We went to the zoo a lot. Elephants are gigantic animals. Like if they're in the room, you absolutely positively know it. They take up a lot of space. They swing their trunk back and forth. They don't smell that good. And they're they seem docile, but they can kill you in an instant. There is an elephant in the room right now, and that elephant is called grief. I think another maybe more appropriate idiom or metaphor is it's like a bull in a china shop in terms of how COVID-19 is just pretty much causing chaos in this world of order we've tried to create for ourselves. So what are the elements of grief? The elements of grief include, first and foremost, just the loss of our normal routines and normalcy. I'm a big believer in maximum entropy and how one of the responsibilities and challenges of mankind is to bring some order to chaos. And physicians are some of the most obsessive, compulsive people in the world. And we feel like it's our calling to bring some order to the chaos related to the human condition and human health. And we train long and hard to bring order to this chaos. And we also try and create some calm and normalcy in our personal lives. And that's one of the challenges. That's always been one of the challenges of being a physician is as you're trying to bring normalcy and calm to our patients' lives, can you maintain any of that for yourself? So unfortunately, this pandemic has really disrupted our normalcy. And it's not just in our county or our state or our nation, it's worldwide. And that's definitely something to grieve. And then I think there's a lot of fear, and part of the fear we have is about the economic toll of this pandemic on us personally, professionally, in our nation and in the world. And I don't really follow the economy that closely, but there certainly are a lot of stories about how our current shelter-in-place initiatives are taking a big hit on our economy, and people are losing jobs and filing for unemployment, and the government is just printing money, and this has huge implications for everybody. And then many of us are in situations where the shelter in place and the virtualization of care is having a huge effect on running our practices and the revenue and the staff and whether you can keep your staff. And so definitely a lot of fear there. I think that the next point, the loss of connection, is a very emotional one for physicians. We very much enjoy connecting with our patients in person, physically, in the office, looking them in the eye, examining them, holding their hands when appropriate. Much of the joy we derive from life is from making connections with our patients and our colleagues and our teammates on our medical teams. And we're grieving that loss. In my particular unit, most of us are working remotely. A small handful of us take turns being in the clinic and seeing those patients who absolutely need to be seen. But I always told my family I never take for granted the fact that with my work, I have a place to go every day. It's kind of like that television show Cheers. It's nice to have a place where everybody knows your name and they call you doctor, and you're an important part of a team doing good work in the community. And I think we're grieving that. And then lastly, we are grieving the loss of safety on two levels. First of all, there's the microscopic level. This nasty little virus, which spreads quickly because it appears to be most infectious in asymptomatic carriers before they become sick. I mean, I've never worried so much about germs in my life. I'm a person that washes my hands but I'm not afraid to touch doorknobs or to hug people or whatever. I always figure I have an immune system and I have stomach acid and stuff. If I drop food on the floor, of course I'm going to eat it. But this novel coronavirus, due to its easy spread and its lethality in a subset of those it infects, just really shakes our confidence in what is safe and unsafe in terms of germ theory. Here's a little example. I was out for a bike ride this morning before I started working, and I realized, well, I'm pretty close to Village Bakery in downtown Davis, and on Thursdays they make coconut pineapple scones, which is my favorite. It's like food heroin. And I remember that I had $5 in my back pocket. And I remember that I carry a mask in this little basket on my bike. And so I said, I am going to pick up a scone and I'll be the hero when I bring this home. So I got to the Village Bakery and I got off my bike, but then I realized the door to Village Bakery is closed and I'm going to have to touch that doorknob to go inside, and I don't have any wipes or hand sanitizers. So I very sadly got back on my bike and headed north without a pineapple scone. But oh my God, in the past, I would have never thought about that. Anyway. And then also, we're also fearing the loss of safety on a much larger macroscopic societal level. I'm not saying this is going to happen, but if the pandemic got out of control worldwide, it's going to be like Blade Runner or whatever futuristic sort of show, you know, where there's total anarchy and chaos. And of course, that would be very worrisome because for physicians in particular, we're rules followers. We believe in things like the rule of law and, you know, the concept of personal property and everybody, only having what they own, things like that. So there are concerns about things like that. All right, next slide. So David KESSLER, who worked with Kubler-Ross, he wrote a great article in the Harvard Business Review recently about grief and the state, and he reminded us of the stages of grieving. And I just want to review those with you. I know that many of you know this by heart, but it's important to call out the different stages of it, especially when facing a pandemic. So the first stage is that there's denial. And that's where a normal person says, oh, yeah, that you know, this pandemic thing, this coronavirus, that's just among Chinese people in Wuhan that eat raw meat from open markets, or, you know, buy turtles and doves, or, you know, eat unusual animals we've never heard of. And then it sort of spread to Italy, and you think, oh, those people aren't Chinese, but yeah, that's really far. And then, you know, it started happening in New York, and you're thinking, oh, New York, I think that's in America. Like, wow, that's part of my country and stuff. Oh, but it's really far. It's on the other side of the country, so it won't happen. So it's natural to have some denial. It's a natural, normal defense mechanism. And then the next stage is anger. And it's sort of like, what do you mean there's a shelter in place? So what do you mean I can't operate on all my patients' eyes? What do you mean I have to do virtual care? That's not good care. What do you mean I'm being reassigned to the ER? Like, I'm a family doctor who hasn't done that in 20 years. Or so what do you mean I have to get tested for an N95 mask? That's all right. So anyway, there's a lot of anger, and it's legitimate anger, and I think we've all felt a lot of that. And then of course, you know, our brains, they enter this stage of bargaining, like, okay, this I'll just stick it out for 8 weeks, and then after 8 weeks, everything will be fine, and I can just get it out. But then the 8 weeks turn into 12 weeks, and then it's 16 weeks, and it's not super clear. So that's not a super gratifying stage to stay in. And then, you know, after this pandemic went on for a few weeks, you just start realizing, oh, this is like real, and it's super sad. Like, this does not feel good. This is not just a bad day or a bad week. This has gone on a long time. And I think that there's a definite melancholy and sadness due to the duration and severity of this pandemic. And then finally, there's the stage of acceptance. where you're forced to realize, oh my God, this is a real thing. This is happening. Like the bodies are piling up. And then eventually you know somebody personally who's actually affected by this. And that's when you start entering the stage of acceptance. And of course, that you need to get there before you can start moving on and start gaining some control of a situation which otherwise was just totally out of control. And that's when you start saying things like, yeah, like I'm not used to working in the ER or the COVID clinic, but I can be trained for that. I see other people doing it, and I need to adapt to the situation that's happening. I love John Kabat-Zinn. I actually spoke at an international physician wellness conference in Boston in 2016. I say I spoke to a small room of about 50, but of course John Kabat-Zinn was a headliner, and he spoke to the huge auditorium of several hundred people. And you know, he's the I call him the founder of modern mindfulness, which I characterize as the secular pullout of Buddhist meditation. And he's an MIT trained scientist. He's on the faculty at the University of Massachusetts. And when he spoke at this conference, he you know, unlike all the other speakers who got up and stood behind the podium, he got up in a lotus position on top of the speaker's table, and he just started, you know, saying all these super wise things like, there'll be many times in your life when you'll be shot by an arrow. And then he paused, a dramatic pause, and he says, your only job is to make sure that you don't shoot yourself with another arrow. So he just kind of flings out these lovely little pearls. And another one of his pearls is featured here in this slide. And it says, you can't stop the waves, but you can learn to surf. And I think the lesson for us here during a pandemic is we can't stop this pandemic, right? This virus it's spread worldwide. But eventually, as we try and move through our stages of grief, we can learn to adapt to it. And I think that's a very hopeful statement for all of us, and it will allow us to make some progress move forward. Several years ago, somebody taught me how to import shapes into a PowerPoint slide, and ever since then, I've just gone crazy. So this is a John Chuck mishmash slide that brings together 4 thoughts. The first one is on the left side of the slide. The question that I want to pose to all of us is, you know, who do you want to be during the COVID-19 crisis? Like 5 years from now, when you're telling your friends and family like what you did and how you responded to COVID, like who was the person you wanted to be in the face of a crisis, and then who were you? So that's one thing. The second element of this slide is the transition of moving through the stages of grief, you know, which include fear and learning and growth. Under fear, it's things like you're hoarding toilet paper, you're getting mad, you're complaining, you're spreading fear. It's just normal early on when grieving. And then you might transition into a learning phase where you start giving up what you can't control, and then you start realizing, hey, everybody, including myself, we're just doing our best. And then as you move further through your grief, you might get to a phase where you say to yourself, I'm actually able to live in the present, be a little more mindful like I was before the pandemic. You're able to be kind to yourself, and you're able to reach out beyond yourself to help others. I have this belief that if you're able to transition through these different phases of grieving, that you might end up on the far right, which is a depiction of the Greek mythological concept of the phoenix rising from the ashes. The idea that it's through our suffering and our grief that we become more resilient and a better version of ourselves. The last element of this slide, which is found on the bottom, features some lovely little characters and animals. There's a snail on the left, there's Speedy Gonzales in the middle, and then there's the classic story of the tortoise and the hare on the right. And I include that in this slide just to call out the fact that we all are moving through our stages of grief and adaptation at a different rate. And the exact same person in different stages of their adaptation can move quickly or slowly, because we all have our own individual histories and our hang-ups and you know, our MO for adapting to change. So I hope you enjoy this slide. I had fun making it. One of the things that serves as a gigantic obstacle to us living with and adapting to major change, including pandemics, is how we deal with the disappointment we have in the behavior of others and ourselves during moments of crisis. And I remember years ago having a long conversation with my late father, who was just my favorite mentor in life. He was the minister of the same church in San Francisco's Chinatown for over 3 decades. And then at age 60, when he was at the top of his game, he made this conscious decision to move to the East Bay and become a seminary professor at Berkeley for about 15 years and stuff. And he, you know, over those decades of ministry and being a professor, he read a lot, he lectured a lot, he mentored a lot of students and members of his congregation. So for me, he was always the go-to source of discussing the most difficult things in my life. So I remember once I met for coffee in Oakland, and I said, "Dad, you know, I forgot the exact circumstances, but the issue was I've been shaken to the core because I'm extremely disappointed about something that happened at work. I think it was related to a role model of mine, somebody I really trusted, who did something that really hurt me and stuff." And my father was a very generous listener, and he asked for the details and is very compassionate. And then he says, "Yeah, that's really difficult." And he goes, "That's a pretty common phenomenon in the human experience." And he says, "What I say to myself when things like that happen to me is I say to myself, I'm disappointed because the person could have done better, but not surprised, human nature being what it is." And I just want to point out that it's not just other people that disappoint us during a crisis. We might also disappoint ourselves. Maybe, you know, the narrative in our head over, you know, the decades that we groomed ourselves to be great physicians was, I'm a team player, I'm courageous. You know, if there was a shooter in the clinic, I would be the person who was calm and maybe did some sacrificial things to save other people. But then when the moment actually happens, sometimes we flinch or we pucker, and our behavior is also something less than what we wished it had been. So I encourage you to apply my father's wisdom to yourself too. If you find that in response to this crisis, you maybe came up short, just say to yourself, I'm disappointed in myself. I definitely could have done better, but not surprised. I'm a human being, and maybe I can do better next time. Who doesn't love Mr. Rogers? I'm just going to let you enjoy this picture for a while. But you may have heard the story Mr. Rogers told of his mother, and I'm just going to read it to you. It says, Fred Rogers often told this story about when he was a boy and would see scary things on the news. My mother would say to me, look for the helpers. You will always find people who are helping. And to this day, especially in times of disaster, I remember my mother's words, and I'm always comforted by realizing that there are still so many helpers, so many caring people in this world. I'm just going to have a sip of vodka here. That's good. And surely, in the early stages of this pandemic, there was some embarrassing, less than noble behavior demonstrated worldwide. But early on, there were helpers who, you know, put their reputations out there, did what they thought was right, said what they thought was right, and we saw them on the national stage, the worldwide stage, and we also saw them locally. And I just want to call out, you know, on the bottom row here in the Sacramento region, you know, Lindsay Coate, who I've had the pleasure of working with on several different projects, is just right out front, you know, growing the Joy of Medicine program, reaching out to the advisory committee, you know, saying, what can we do? How can we, you know, reach all of our constituents in the region with the wellness programs. We had Dr. Rockers just helping to lead some of the virtual counseling programs that we have, and making sure that everybody knew that they had listening ear available to them during a moment of crisis. We had the great Rajiv Mosqueda, who was chair of the Joy of Medicine Advisory Committee up until this year, and he had laid the foundation for many of these Joy of Medicine programs and the principles that are serving us well during this crisis. The great Eileen Wetzel, who runs SSVMS, and once again, she should just run all the wellness programs for all of organized medicine in the state and the country. She's just doing an outstanding leadership job. And then, the great Peter Yellowlees from UC Davis, who's their chief wellness officer and a real hero of mine. He brings a lot of academic rigor to physician health and wellness, and runs a great fellowship program in collaboration with UC Irvine. And so people stepped up nationally on the international stage, but also big time locally, largely through the SSVMS Medical Society. And you didn't have to look far to see many helpers, many of whom might look familiar to you. There's the great, in the top left, there's the great John Wiesenfarth, who is the current president of the Medical Society, assuming the reins from the great Chris Serdahl. And I hope, Chris, that you're on the call. You guys have provided great leadership for the physicians of the region, and really, and you're very good about getting out the word by email and social media and through the fabulous Medical Society Journal, which everybody enjoys reading. And then in the lower left, one of our Kaiser Santa Clara pediatricians with an engineering background. She partnered with some friends at Apple, and they are literally producing millions of protective face shields to ship out worldwide. And then at our Sacramento Medical Center, the children of 3 of our ER doctors started Team Shield and started making protective face shields for physicians. And so it's just amazing, right? I mean, at the very beginning of this crisis, when there was a lot of fear, people like Wiesenfarth and his colleagues in the ER, smiling, enthusiastic, afraid, but showing up for work, doing their jobs. And then people, physicians being innovative and reaching out and making what they know in society to get good things happening. And then even the children. So, as Mr. Rogers' mother said, it says my internet connection is unstable, but I'm going to keep going here. Anyway, so just look for the helpers. Okay. So I'd like to share some tips with you on how to regain your wellness in case you've lost your grip on it somewhat. The first suggestion is to talk to others about your feelings. I think that the worst thing in the world would be to hold your feelings inside of you and to feel like you're the only one suffering. Definitely reach out to a colleague. Physician colleagues, know the pain and stress of this pandemic. I think, in a way that's very familiar to you. So reach out to your peers, talk about how you're feeling, and what you'll quickly find out is that you're not alone. Because one of the worst things in the world is to feel like you're alone in your suffering. The second thing is to, there's the idiom, people often say, this is not my first rodeo, if they're trying to tell somebody they have been through this before. But this coronavirus pandemic is our first pandemic rodeo. Like, there's nobody on this WebEx or on your medical team who has lived through an international pandemic of this scale. So be forgiving of yourself and others for how you're responding. It is our first rodeo. And then remember, you've weathered storms before and have learned some resiliency skills that helped you emerge from those challenges and will help you emerge from this. I know many of you are very familiar with the concept of motivational interviewing, when you're trying to work with a patient to make a big change in your life, and you ask them, gee, has there ever been a time in your life when you faced a great challenge and you were successful in meeting the challenge? What were some elements of your habits and behavior there? So all you have to do is think back through how you survived your pre-med years, your medical school years, your residency years, and the challenges of your practice. And you will see that you have many of the habits and traits that will allow you to weather this storm also. And then also, now more than ever, basic care is essential to you being well. You need to eat healthy, stay active, and get good sleep. And here's a lovely picture of good sleep. And you all know about sleep hygiene, but I would definitely say that the last thing you should do to try and get good sleep is to check the New York Times, CNN, or Fox News right before you go to bed. I would take a news holiday after 7 p.m. every day and try and end your day with some positive thoughts or a good walk or a bowl of ice cream. Those of you who've heard me speak before know that I sometimes encourage us all to focus on gratitude, especially at the start of your day. And what I encourage you to do is to make the transition from waking up every day and saying, woe is me, which is very common for many of us, even if we have good lives. You say, woe is me because you're tired, you're scared, or with regards to this pandemic, you're so sad about what is happening to you and your world. But I encourage you to flip the switch and make a conscious, intentional effort to every morning when you wake up, focus on the positive, focus on things you're grateful for, and say to yourself, literally, wow is me. Not woe is me, but wow is me. Everybody on the call, put your hands up in the air and say, wow is me, all right? So why wow? Well, you woke up for another day. You probably woke up dry, like, continent of stool and urine. And then you're going to go evacuate your colon and your bladder on your own terms in a place of your choice. And then for one more day, you have meaningful work and the strength to do it. And as physicians, I don't need to tell you all the things that could be going wrong in your body and in your life that, that you should never, ever take for granted. So tomorrow morning, I know the natural inclination when you first open your eyes is to say, woe is me, but instead, literally say, wow is me, and start counting your blessings, and it'll help you get off to a better day. We are practicing physical distancing, but that is not the same as social distancing. In a world of shelter in place and physical distancing, it is still possible to find new ways to stay socially connected. And I don't know about you and your medical team, but I have learned more about Microsoft Teams in the past 4 weeks than I ever wanted to know. I used to always ignore all those things and never use those things, and I hated WebEx and I hated SharePoint. But those are the things that are keeping me connected with not only my colleagues and my patients, but also my family. I mean, I used to see my family like maybe every few months, and even that wasn't so fun. But now on both sides of our family, we have a weekly Zoom meeting. And then most every evening during the dinner hour, I'm on the phone, with our kids and stuff. Like, we never used to check in with them. So and then I've always texted, but now I'm texting more than ever. And so the technology's there, and it behooves you to become familiar with it and to make a conscious effort to stay in close social contact using technology at a time when we cannot be in close physical proximity. It's also important to interrupt the worry of your life with healthy pleasures. My former colleague Dave Sobel wrote a book about that, but here are just some examples. Jen Kilpatrick, one of our ER doctors, is here with her husband in their beautiful Midtown Sacramento place, supporting a local restaurant by taking out and enjoying a picnic on their front lawn. I know donuts are not good for you. I was a nutrition major in college, but they taste great. And my baseline is that I eat a donut every 2 months, guilt-free, but I've been eating more donuts during the pandemic, maybe like one every other week, and I'm still alive. So, go ahead and treat yourself to a few more food treats than you used to. I always say if eating a donut every other week and eating, the occasional pork, kills me 6 months sooner, so be it. I mean, because those last years were miserable anyway. So, and then a lot of people are talking about binge watching TV, but they're kind of gravitating towards really stupid, dumb things that make you feel worse about the world. But there are some really good programs out there, including things like The Good Place And then recently, my family, we discovered a show called Community with Chevy Chase and other people. It's like super funny and hilarious. So go ahead and binge watch some TV and include some positive things. And then in the lower left-hand corner, I love music. I'm a really bad musician, so I super appreciate music, and I love listening to Spotify, and I love going to concerts and everything. So I've been listening to a lot of music, and I've always focused on musicians that inspire me. So you might want to do more of that. And then I don't know about you, but I'm exercising more than I ever have in my adult life during this pandemic, because doing a lot of remote care, having more time in general. And so I'm biking, I'm walking, doing old-fashioned sit-ups and push-ups, and hopefully you are interrupting your worry with physical activity. And then this is a little picture of a young man. There's a saying, sun's out, guns out. When the weather's good, put on a tank top, show off your body, and have a good time. And then last but not least, this is a fabulous time to engage in table games with people in your home. So we've been playing a lot more Settlers of Catan, and a game called Ticket to Ride, and then Sushi Go. I mean, just Rummy Cub, whatever you like. You'll discover or rediscover what it was like for me growing up in the 60s and 70s. We just played a bunch of games, and it was super fun. So consider engaging in those healthy pleasures. And of course, there's always room for humor. And I've been writing something called a daily dose of wellness for my Permanente colleagues, and I pretty much don't have to do much anymore because people keep sending me things. And this was one that I posted recently. It's a diary from a quarantine father-in-law, and it has silly things like, day one, I can do this, got enough food and wine to last a month. And then day two, opening my 8th bottle of wine, I fear wine supplies might not last. Or what's day 10, struck up a conversation with a spider today, seems nice, he's a web designer. That's kind of funny. Or day 13, if you keep a glass of wine in each hand, you can't accidentally touch your face. So there's a lot of humor out there, some of it pretty fun, and so feel free to engage in that and to pass it around freely. Humor, I think, is more contagious than COVID, so pass it around freely. This is a lovely slide based on a communication that Dr. Carson Laywall, who's a neurologist at Kaiser Oakland, sent out to his colleagues. Dr. Laywall served in the military in Afghanistan, and early on in the pandemic, he said, if we have a surge, it's going to be just like the mass casualty medicine that I did as a neurologist in Afghanistan, and there's not a lot of need for neurologists over there, and so he was doing a lot of trauma care and ICU type care. But these are some tips that he gave to his colleagues at Kaiser Oakland early on. Number one, you've actually already done this in terms of you've faced big challenges before. The specifics were different, but you faced challenges before. And they said practicing outside your specialty, which many of us are doing, or at least practicing in different ways, it's incredibly uncomfortable. And just to call that out and to give it a name and to mourn it is important. Fear acts on all of us differently, and he said it also acts differently on the same person in a different situation. He said nothing will go to plan, and that certainly has been the case with us ramping up to deal with this pandemic. A lot of best laid plans, but there are always glitches, so you just need to move forward. Resources will be limited. This has been most blatantly obvious in the PPE arena. We seem to be doing okay with ventilators, ICU beds, and hospital beds, but everybody's still struggling to generate enough PPE. You will not be perfect, and physicians, we thrive on being perfect. We love being obsessive compulsive and dotting all our I's, crossing our T's, and having perfect outcomes, but that's just not possible during a pandemic. And unfortunately, we'll all be exposed and we'll be judged unfairly. And I think we're all very sensitive to peer review and malpractice cases in the medical board. But if things go haywire, it's not going to be perfect. You will be judged unfairly. But that's just what happens during times like this. Humor helps, as we've said many times. We're all in this together. And he said, most importantly, be kind to one another. And this is from somebody who's been through hell in Afghanistan. in the Permanent Medical Group last year at our annual Shareholders Day, we had a couple of guest speakers, including Daniel Pink, but also Vivek Murthy, who is the former U.S. Surgeon General. And he's a very self-disclosing person and shared some stories of vulnerability. He said this during his presentation. He said, "We are all going to have moments of doubt. I have them, I'm sure you have them, whether we wonder if we're actually good enough, if we're the right person to do the job and get it done." And he said, and it's in those moments that we need to reaffirm each other. So I listened to the videotape of this presentation many times because I wanted to get the words just right. And these were his exact words. And after I wrote them down, I went running to a dictionary and I said, reaffirm, reaffirm, reaffirm. What does that mean? So in reading about reaffirm, it said that it's a transitive verb, and I definitely didn't know what a transitive verb was. I had to look that up. And transitive verbs are not just verbs that can take an object, they demand objects. Without an object to effect, the sentence that a transitive verb inhabits will not seem complete. So his closing remarks about, and it's in these moments of doubt that we need to reaffirm. Like reaffirm who? We need to reaffirm one another. Physicians need to reaffirm other physicians because nobody knows what it feels like to be a physician other than a physician. And we have lots in common with respiratory therapists and nurses and physical therapists and ward clerks. But I think that in addition to reaffirming them, it's very important that we reaffirm one another. I'm a big fan of Kubler-Ross. I just posted a daily dose of wellness about another Kubler-Ross quote, but I love this one. The most beautiful people we have known are those who have known defeat, known suffering, known struggle, known loss, and have found their way out of the depths. These persons have an appreciation, a sensitivity, and an understanding of life that fills them with compassion, gentleness, and a deep loving concern. Beautiful people do not just happen. And so while I would never wish hardship or pandemics on any of you, that would be a really horrible thing to do. The fact of the matter is that we are facing a pandemic and we're in the midst of a pandemic. And we are going to suffer and we're going to struggle and we will have losses. And we will all emerge from this. And when we do, based on our suffering and our losses, we will have an empathy and a level of concern that we did not have as we entered this pandemic. So know that there is that light at the end of this tunnel. And then I love the Japanese art form kintsugi, which is an artistic metaphor for this concept. The Japanese, when they would have a broken piece of art or ceramic, instead of throwing it away and buying a new set from Target, they would put the pieces back together and fill the fracture lines with gold dust, and the resulting art form is called kintsugi. And it's just a metaphor for how it's oftentimes in our brokenness that we find the most kind and loving parts of who we are. My wife was so nice. She knows I talk about kintsugi, and so a couple of Christmases ago, she bought me this beautiful kintsugi bowl from Italy. It's just beautiful emerald green with the gold things, and then she bought me some pearls to put in there. So it's just lovely. Okay, so these are some of my closing slides. Early on in the pandemic, I got to thinking about a young man I've known since his early years, who, when he got to junior high, he said, when I grow up, I want to, fly jets. And I said, oh, you want to fly like those cargo carriers, like your uncle flies out of Travis? He goes, no, when I grow up, I want to fly a jet that has missiles under the wings. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. It's just a great young man, super smart, great athlete, confident but not cocky and stuff. And so I remember writing him a letter of support for a Navy scholarship. And anyway, he got in the Navy. And when you go into the Navy and you want to be a pilot, it's like being a pre-med at a major university. Like, everybody wants to do it, but nobody ends up doing it. They end up, flying cargo carriers or helicopters and stuff. But sure enough, this young man just kept doing well and well and well, and he's now a jet fighter pilot. And so I contacted him early on in the pandemic because I wanted to know from a jet fighter pilot how to react in times of high stress, high stakes work. Because I thought there's so much that physicians have in common with jet fighter pilots. First of all, we're the cream of the crop. We're the best of the best. We're the ones who made it through pre-med medical school residency, got the fabulous job you have and stuff. And then the reason we got there is because we're very obsessive compulsive people who are entrusted with major responsibilities, high standards, very public, granular metrics, and track records of success. But like jet fighter pilots, the work we do is very risky. There are a lot of forces working against us, and our lives are literally on the line. Our lives and the lives of others are on the line. So I said, can you just please send me some cockpit wisdom that I can share with my physicians? And within a day, he sent me some things, and I said, is this okay to share? Is this like, top secret? He goes, no, this is totally public. You can tell people I said this. And so I'd like to share that with you now. Cockpit wisdom from a Navy fighter pilot. Wisdom number 1, no fast hands in the cockpit. A misconception in the public is that the best fighter pilots must be those with lightning fast reflexes. However, in reality, our training emphasizes just the opposite. During an in-flight emergency, when the master caution light is flashing in your face, the urge is to impulsively flip a switch or activate a backup system can be overwhelming. It is during these moments that we fall back on our training, find the checklist that is the best fit for the scenario, and execute with deliberate focus. This is fabulous advice for me if I get repurposed to the ER. I just had a training session for that. I just got fitted for my mask. Like I'm scheduled for that the second week in May, and I shouldn't be afraid because I know the fundamentals of good medicine. And it made me think about when I first graduated from the UC Davis residency program. I went to Kaiser Vallejo, and all of a sudden, I was first call overnight, covering the ER and the ICU, admitting and taking care of all the sickest patients. And I did, I think, fabulously good work because I just fell back on all the basics I had learned in medical school and residency. But I remember one of my colleagues down there who had graduated 1 year earlier than me from Davis said, hey, just stick to the fundamentals. It's the 4 Ps, right? Keep them puffing, pumping, perfusing, and peeing. And if you can do those things, they'll be alive when the cavalry arrives in the morning. And sure enough, in 7 years of hospital medicine in Vallejo, everybody who could have been alive, be kept alive, I kept alive. And it was just by relying on the basics. Number 2, bounce back. Fighter pilots make mistakes all the time. Whether in dynamic training exercises or in actual combat, there is no shortage of threats that hinder perfect execution. The best among us are those who are able to acknowledge the mistake, mentally compartmentalize the error for debrief, and continue the mission with a focus on all the other opportunities left to succeed in that sortie. And that's pretty much what we need to do if there's a surge and the poop hits the fan. We can't lament the fact that we're not perfect or that we've made a small mistake. The next patient needs our full attention. We have to be totally mindful and in the moment. So what I would encourage all of us, especially if there's a surge, is that the best we can do is rapid sequential tasking interrupted by generous self-affirmation. That's what our patients need from us. This is not the time we're going to wallow about the fact we're working out of our specialty, we don't have the right PPE, the nurses aren't helping me. You just do your best and then you move on. Show of force. Unfortunately, in combat, the enemy gets the vote. This reality can produce moments of intense frustration when the circumstances of the engagement feel dictated by the adversary. In a tactical jet circling overhead, as the chaotic ambush below unfolds, our most requested response is a show of force. This maneuver calls for an extremely low, fast, and loud pass over the engagement and is intended to display to the enemy what a poor decision they just made. Although the desired response is a retreating enemy, often the feedback we receive is that of the uplifting effect the maneuver had on our friendly forces during their time of need. And I think that the application for us as our community rallies to meet the challenge of COVID-19 is that there is no greater show of force than our dedicated teams of healthcare professionals bringing their best to the fore as we fight the battle of our lives. Much of what I talked about during today's presentation was just drawn from daily dose of wellness messages I've been sending out for the past month and a half, and you can find all of those on a little blog I've created. It's www.kpdailydose.blogspot.com. If you have something to send me, I'm at john.chuck@kp.org, and I can share your wisdom with a wider audience.
Thank you, Dr. Chuck.
Okay, last
One
slide.
more.
I just want to celebrate once again. I love the Medical Society, and you know, as Lindsay said in the introduction, the Medical Society has so many Joy of Medicine resources available for you before COVID-19, and all those things are still there for you, and they're even more relevant and appropriate and important for you. So please engage, check out the website. It's all there, it's all confidential, and much of it is free. And I would just like to acknowledge the major organizations and medical groups in the region who've been generous supporters of these programs. I think that it's a real point of pride that in our region, the Medical Society has been able to rally support from the major healthcare players. And I think that the talent of the Medical Society and participation from all the medical groups is what has fueled the SSVMS's success in this arena. All right, that's it. It's 6:54. Is it 6:54?
It is, and we do have a couple of questions that have been submitted for you.
All right.
All right, so the first one is from Lori Gregg, and she writes, do you think anything more could have been done for our colleague, Lorna Breen, an ER physician in NYC who committed suicide last Sunday?
Yeah, I read about that. My understanding is that she was a 39-year-old, extremely talented chief of the ER in her hospital, and that her hospital was one of the hospitals that was overrun with numerous very sick patients, and that what she witnessed day after day was a lot of unsuccessful treatment and death. And this is a tragedy, you know, for her colleagues, for her family. I believe her father is also a physician. And to me, it points out the importance of being in this together. I don't know any of the details of how connected or not she was with her colleagues, but I'm thinking that had she had the opportunity to share her feelings with colleagues, had she had the advice to be forgiving of herself for doing less than perfect, had she had time to think about Elizabeth Kubler-Ross and her thoughts about you know, difficult times and how they're difficult, but how they can forge us into a better person for tomorrow. If she'd been more familiar possibly with kintsugi, or the concept of, you know, a phoenix rising from the ashes, I don't know. I mean, it's hard to know without knowing the specifics of her, but I can, as a physician, you know, my heart grieves for her, and I can definitely I can imagine the fear and the anger and the inadequacy, some of those things, how they could have overwhelmed her. So I think her suicide is a reminder to all of us that we need to meet this challenge together, and we need to keep the avenues of communication wide open, and that we all need to pull a little Brene Brown and acknowledge our vulnerability and be forgiving of ourselves for being less than perfect.
Thank you. And one more question, just a reminder, everyone, if you have a question, please enter it into the chat function. This one is also from Lori Gregg.
Oh,
And
thank you, Lori.
She asks, how can we get better sleep? Who else is up every night at 2 a.m.?
Okay, that's a good question. So my friend Dave Sobel, who wrote about the healthy pleasures, while he was still the regional chair of health promotion at Kaiser Permanente, he actually did a lot of work in sleep. I think he partnered with Harvard and he created this big online program we had. And then early in this pandemic, he's now retired, but he reached out to me with a YouTube video clip of somebody he really admires and respects. Is an MD PhD who's a sleep expert and a counselor to a lot of physicians. And he sent me the clip, and one of my daily dose messages was about getting good sleep, and it included the principles that this MD PhD talked about in his video, and link to that video. But and if you go to my blog, kpdailydose.blogspot.com, I think it's in the first week or two of the post, and you can find the details there. But the reason why I mentioned this thing about not feeding yourself bad news in the hours before sleep was because out of all the advice he gave, that's the one that stood out to me. And how guilty are so many of us of having a television in the room and having our iPhone by our bedside, right? And hearing all the little beeps and messages as we're trying to relax and go to sleep, and thinking, I just need to check that one last story of the New York Times, or I just need to check my inbox before I go to bed. There is no way that you're going to have good sleep with or without a pandemic if you do that. So yeah. So anyway, and in the post, all the other things that you've already read about good sleep hygiene and healthy pleasures that will help you sleep.
Okay, we have one more question from Judith Blazon. If you are in the late stages of COVID stress, where one is working on things for change, and your colleagues are stuck in fear, anger, or denial, what is the best way to help?
Oh, yeah. So once again, it's different people are in different stages of their grieving, and they move through it at different rates, and you can do two steps, one step forward and two steps back. But this question is related to somebody who may feel like they're making some good progress, but colleagues are not in lockstep, and that can be discouraging, right? So my first thought is okay, disappointed but not surprised. I wish my colleagues were in lockstep with me, or actually leading the way and encouraging me, but don't be surprised just because they're human beings just like you, right? And so disappointed but not surprised is my first thought. And the second one is, it's an opportunity for you to open communication with them and lend a generous ear, and maybe find out more about why they are stuck in the stage of fear, like 2 months into a pandemic. And it would be an opportunity to maybe learn more about their perspective, and it might be something that very much surprises you. So I would encourage you, even though it's awkward, to just extend a listening ear, and I would imagine they would actually share a lot with you. And then the other thing is, if you're very concerned about their behavior, I would actually reach out to your group's physician well-being champions, who, every hospital is mandated to have a well-being committee to look after impaired physicians and things. So if you're really worried about somebody, you can confidentially let somebody on the well-being committee know about that. And then another great resource, maybe for somebody who is not impaired to that degree, is the EAP program, the Employee Assistance Program that most groups have. I am actually a regular patient of Marisa Pierce, who's a marriage and family therapist. I see her free through Kaiser Permanente's EAP program. I always tell people she keeps me more right in the head. So as you see where you are right now, and you look at this colleague, not only could you possibly make them aware of EAP, but you yourself could engage in your EAP program to help you cope with working with these people. So hopefully that's a little bit helpful.
And just one last request. Could you please share the Blogspot address again?
Yes, in fact, I can go back in my slides. I have to reach around my corner here to see the other screen. Here it is. It's www.blogspot.com. kpdailydose.blogspot.com. And every day I have a whole bunch of posts like saved up, and I just try and choose one that's appropriate for the circumstances and mood of the day. And some are very serious, and some are just meant to be entertaining and funny. Today's was a post featuring Carly Kaplan, one of our plastic surgeons, and she told the story of how she was very much benefiting from our Kaiser Permanente physician resilience course that we have our docs do, and how she was employing the exercise and the mindfulness Headspace app, and how last Friday she and her husband ordered out from the Water Boy, and then the food was perfect, and when she came home, her husband had cleaned the house on a dress, and they got out the cloth napkins and they enjoyed the meal while the kids watched a movie upstairs. So anyway, that was today's post. So sometimes they're just kind of fun, practical suggestions like that. Other times it's kind of a meaty conversation about the stages of grief. Sometimes it's just a Kubler-Ross quote with a beautiful image. So hopefully you find some things in there that can help you, in your daily walk as you and your colleagues work through this pandemic.
Okay, thank you so much. I am not seeing any more questions. So I wanted to take the opportunity to thank you all again for joining us this evening, and a special thank you to you, Dr. Chuck, for putting together such a wonderful presentation. Again, we will be posting this on joyofmedicine.org, and hopefully you will share this presentation with your colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you very much to the Medical Society and Lindsay and Sam and Eileen for hosting this. And thanks to all of you who took the time to log in and invest in your own health and wellness during this difficult time. We're all in this together, and we're going to get through it together.